Loaded. You can beat Russian roulette, and not only that, but Russian roulette is a fake game which got popularized because of movies and other media. I'm going to explain how to beat Russian roulette while blindfolded, how to beat Russian roulette if the other person has a revolver, and how to beat it in pretty much every single mainstream situation that you can think of. That being said, do not play Russian roulette in real life. At no point in time will I be pointing a live firearm at myself. If I am shooting live rounds, my revolver will be pointed downrange. And when demonstrating in my room, I will be using snap caps, aka dummy rounds. With that being said, let's first go over the 3 common ways in which Russian roulette is played as depicted in most media, that way we are all on the same page. The first most common way Russian roulette is played is that the other person is handed a revolver with a single bullet. They spin the cylinder and close it before seeing where the round landed. They then pull the trigger, and if their brains don't leave their body, they either respin the cylinder and try again, or cock the hammer without a new spin and then decide whether or not the revolver has a live round in it. However, if you know how a revolver works, you can easily rig the game. In a decocked revolver, the chamber that will be the next one to fire is one over, not directly behind the barrel. So here I have a Smith & Wesson Model 10 which holds 6 shots, and here I have a Ruger SP101, a more modern revolver that holds 5 shots. You can see here that as I pull the trigger in double action, the round that is going to be fired is sitting at the 1 o'clock position and rotates into place, meaning that you can straight up see whether or not the next chamber is going to be live or empty. This is also true if, for whatever reason, the revolver you're given holds 5 shots, as you can see here. By the way, pulling the trigger without cocking the hammer is called double action because pulling the trigger is doing 2 things, cocking and firing. If you cock the hammer manually and then pull the trigger, this is called single action because the trigger is only doing 1 thing, firing. I saw some people confused about that in my other video. You can also see the rounds by looking from the front of the revolver, and while that sounds extremely obvious, you wouldn't believe the number of films and shows out there that forget this detail. So hey, for any filmmakers out there, add some snap caps into your revolver to make them look more real. Knowing how a revolver works breaks the game because now this isn't a game of chance. You can just stare at the rounds in the cylinder and know with a 100% accuracy, unless it's some kind of magical revolver, if the next round is live or not. But this is not the only way to play Russian roulette. In the 2003 TV special, Darren Brown Plays Russian Roulette live in front of 3 million viewers. The stuntman, Darren Brown, would play Russian roulette, which included him pointing a revolver at his own head. What is unique about this scenario is that the armorer puts on a custom shield preventing Darren from looking at which chamber has the round in it. And so we can't use the trick that I mentioned before. So if you were in this situation, now what? Unless you're in a pitch black room, I have some good news for you. As long as the round in the cylinder is metallic and has some kind of shine to it, which is essentially every standard load that I can think of, once you cock the revolver, you can physically see if there is a bullet ready to be fired. This is a demonstration with dummy ammunition, and I'm not right behind the camera. Please, for the love of God, do not point a firearm at yourself. You can see the round being rotated into place as the revolver is cocked, and the round is not hard to see at all. That is because if there is no round in the chamber, then it's going to be essentially pitch black. Therefore, all you need to do is catch a glimpse of something metallic in the center and you know that the round is loaded. And sure, in most situations, playing peekaboo by staring down the barrel of a gun is incredibly stupid and suspicious, but as this is a game that requires you to literally point a firearm at yourself, if for whatever reason you find yourself kidnapped and forced to play this game, instead of pointing the revolver to the side of your head, point it towards the front of your face and use it as an excuse to look down the barrel as a last resort. Again, please don't do this with an actual firearm. Yes, this is not what Brown does in the show, but spoiler alert, this entire episode and Russian roulette game was just a big stunt and not actually real. Although the show claimed that they used blanks with special effects to show the quote-unquote bullet impacts and so that the stuntman was safe, I should note that you can absolutely die by a blank, especially when you're that close and pressing a revolver into your own head, so please don't try that. Furthermore, a blank has less powder and sometimes has a special kind of powder that burns faster and gives off a brighter flash, but what that also means is that a blank produces significantly less noise and essentially no recoil, which you can also see in the show when he's demonstrating the revolver. This is important because this custom revolver shield they added is not something you see in any other media depictions of Russian roulette, at least from what I've seen. There is a reason for that, as doing this in real life would be extremely risky because the gases from a revolver don't just come out of the muzzle, but also from the cylinder gap, and this can actually be quite powerful and cause serious injuries if you're not careful. The show was able to put on these custom shields as they were using blanks, but if you you were to do this in real life with a live round and much more propellant and gases escaping, there's a good chance you end up blowing up the revolver, or at least blowing up the shield and sending shrapnel at everyone, including the people keeping you hostage. And so this revolver shield is only applicable in niche cases like using blanks for a show, or I suppose if you got a Nagant revolver or something that has a gas seal mechanism, something that I will cover later. So I have explained how you can beat Russian roulette given just a standard revolver, a revolver with a shield blocking visual on the cylinder, but how about while blindfolded? Well, many revolvers spin counterclockwise, since most right-handed people find it easier to swing the cylinder out to the left when the pawl is on the right. Knowing which way the cylinder spins, which you can also tell by, well, just feeling the cylinder if whatever reason you're being blindfolded, is important, as this means you can shove your pinky or whatever finger or appendage you choose into the upcoming chamber and physically feel whether or not there's a round inside. Okay, this won't work if you got big bone fingers, but thankfully I got skinny fingers and so it's not a problem. So even when blindfolded, you can still beat Russian roulette. But as I was saying before, there are numerous ways to play Russian roulette. And so let us go to the second and trickier version of the game. 2 people. Now things get very interesting because there are 2 ways this is usually done. The first way is that both are given a freshly spun revolver that they are not allowed to spin again, and then each person takes turns firing the revolver at themselves until, well, kaboom. This is also somewhat the way it's depicted in the movie Deer Hunter. So now what? Let's go back to how a revolver works. Like I said before, when you cock the revolver hammer, it rotates this cylinder, and this is extremely important and the trick to getting us out of this situation. As you start cocking the hammer, you can see the cylinder starting to slightly spin and rotate between chambers. Instead of pulling the hammer all the way back until it locks into place, pull on it just enough so that the cylinder can start spinning, and then with your other hand, you can rotate the cylinder past as many chambers as you want while keeping pressure on that hammer. And so now you have complete control over where you want the round to be, and therefore when the round fires. Hold on, I can hear somebody already saying, wouldn't doing this be extremely obvious to your captors? And while this does require you to know how a revolver works, as well as some minimal practice, it can be done very discreetly because the hammer only needs to be pulled slightly back, which I'm demonstrating here. And also keep in mind that you can use your imagination and some of that good old charm and smoke and mirrors so that people aren't just staring at your hands and what you're doing. Furthermore, if that is not discreet enough for you, this process can be done in 2 separate stages, which also means it can be done one-handed. Pull on the hammer until you see the cylinder rotate very slightly and then let go of the hammer. And now the cylinder is free to be manipulated to skip 1 chamber. With this knowledge, if you are forced to play Russian roulette with another player, you can rig the game so that you can always land on an empty chamber and that the other player always gets the live round. For example, let's say I'm handed a 6-shot revolver with this configuration. The round is sitting at the 1 o'clock position, meaning that if I fired this at myself, I would die. The first thing I would do is skip a chamber so that now we know the 6th shot will be the live one and also be on the other person's turn. But that's a little too convenient. So what if I was handed a revolver with an odd number of shots, or in this case 5? If I skipped the first round, I would be safe. However, if the game plays out naturally, then I would still lose. The solution is simple. When I get the revolver back in round 3, I skip another chamber, and now the next live round will be in his turn, round 4. And this works out fine because at least to the onlookers, there's still 1 more chamber remaining. And knowing how to do this, you can now rig the game in your favor no matter if you're handed a revolver with even or odd shot capacity. You can also pull this off regardless of which order you get the revolver or where the round is placed, as all you have to change is when and how often you skip a chamber. This also works if you have to point the revolver at the other player, because again, it can set the round so that his is empty and yours is live. But what if you're forced into a game of Russian roulette, but both of you want to live? Well, gaslight the fuck out of the people around you, and while they're distracted, use that 1 round to pop your captor and hit your escape or something like that. I don't know. This video is about how to beat Russian roulette, not how to escape your kidnappers, although I will say that having a single shot to use on people keeping a hostage is better than none. I'm sure you can see by now that Russian roulette does not work because it's so easy to rig, at least if you know the basics about revolvers, which hopefully now you do. So that begs the question, is Russian roulette even real? The earliest record of quote-unquote Russian roulette, and with a heavy emphasis on the quotations, is in the book A Hero of Our Time by Mikhail Lermontov. In an excerpt from the chapter The Fatalist, the scene starts with our protagonist and a Serbian lieutenant at a table with 50 gold pieces and an assortment of pistols, it being unknown which pistols are actually loaded. I took from the table, as I remember now, an ace of hearts and threw it up. Everyone stopped breathing, all eyes expressing fear and a kind of indefinite curiosity. Ran from the pistol to the the fatal ace, which, fluttering in the air, fell slowly. The minute he touched the table, Vulik pulled the trigger, misfire. "God bless," Mini shouted, "not loaded." "We'll see though," said Vulik. He cocked the hammer again, took aim at the cap hanging over the window. A shout rang out and smoke filled the room. When it dissipated, they took off their cap. It was pierced in the very middle, and the bullet was deeply embedded in the wall. So, Mini claimed this book and this chapter in this passage to be the evidence of Russian roulette. But was it? Well, I don't think so. The book was published in 1840, and the characters are using flintlock pistols. Not to mention that the risk here wasn't just whether or not the pistol they grabbed was loaded, but if the pistol would misfire. As according to the passage, the pistol that he chose was indeed loaded, it just happened to misfire because it's a flintlock pistol. And this was not some sort of chance with one shot in the cylinder or the traditional way you see Russian roulette. Further legends concerning the origins of Russian roulette are that this game was played as some sort of a military tradition in Tsarist Russia with Nagant revolvers. And to that I have to say, A, there is no evidence of this, and B, that doesn't even make any sense because the cylinder of a Nagant revolver does not spin freely. The first actual mention of the term Russian roulette was mentioned in January of 1937 with the article Russian Roulette, written by George Surde in Collier's Weekly. In this article, Surde cites dialogue with a French sergeant who served in the Russian army in the Foreign Legion. "Did you ever hear of Russian roulette?" When I said I had not, he told me all about it. When he was in the Russian army in Romania around 1917 and things were cracking up so that their officers felt that they were not only losing prestige, money, family, and country, but were being also dishonored before their colleagues of the Allied armies. Some officer would suddenly pull out his revolver anywhere at the table, in a cafe, at a gathering of friends, remove a cartridge from the cylinder, spin the cylinder, snap it back in place it to his head, and pull the trigger. There were 5 chances to 1 that the hammer would set off a live cartridge and blow his brains all over the place. A couple of things to mention here. This article makes it sound like Russian officers were playing Russian roulette with 5 to 1 odds, which is crazy, as if it was some sort of everyday, extremely common occurrence. There are so many red flags with this story. First of all, the standard issue sidearm at the time in 1917 Tsarist Russia was the Nagant revolver. The Nagant revolver holds 7 shots, not 6, and as I said before, the cylinder does not spin freely. Yes, you can argue that maybe the Russian officers were using the older standard issue Smith & Wesson No. 3 chambered in 6 shots of 44 caliber black powder cartridges that is a break open also, and while the Smith & Wesson No. 3 was indeed still somewhat in use at the time, mostly given to rear echelon troops if nothing else was available, the previous article describes Russian officers. While the income and wealth of Russian officers at this time did vary, officers in Russia, like in many other European countries, especially by 1917, would have been either issued a sidearm or privately purchased their own off of an improved list. That being said, most Tsarist Russian officers were not rolling in money, especially given the turmoil of 1917 Russia. And if they did have enough to buy a pistol for personal use, these sidearms weren't just for practical purposes, but also as a status symbol. In other words, having a Russian officer go out of their way to equip themselves with an outdated black powder revolver would be strange, and while it is plausible that perhaps the Russian officer bought themselves a more modern 6-shot revolver and also has the cylinder spinning freely, this article makes it sound like this wasn't one nut job with a death wish playing Russian roulette, but a regular occurrence. But fine, a plethora of Russian officers getting their hands on some free spinning 6-shot revolvers to play Russian roulette is strange, but still within the realms of possibility. However, that is not the only problem with the story. In the article by Surde, he mentions that if the officer was lucky enough to land on the empty chamber, then he would proceed to go at it again the next day. Really, let's do some basic math. Let's pretend all these Russian officers got their hands on some 6-shot revolvers and loaded 5 chambers with 1 empty, as the article suggests. So your odds of surviving the first attempt are 1 out of 6, or 16.7%. Surviving 2 attempts in a row brings the odds down to 1 over 36, or 2.8%, and if you try 3 in a row, the odds of survival is 1 over 216, or 0.46%, which is slightly better odds than unboxing a knife in Counter-Strike, which is at 1 over 391, or 0.26%. That is ridiculous. If people were whipping out revolvers and squeezing it at their own heads and then trying it again the next day if they lived, so on and so forth, the streets would be littered with dead officers, and this occurrence would have almost certainly, if not definitely, been documented by Russian sources before 1917. And by the way, there were no Russian sources documenting this. And so, what is more likely using Occam's razor? Russian officers who had money were splurging on 4 and 6 shot revolvers in the chaos of 1917 Russia, regularly playing Russian roulette with not 1 live round, but 5 live rounds in 1 empty chamber, casually blowing their brains out on sidewalks and gatherings and cafes, and not a single source came out of Russia corroborating these claims, or at least going, oh yeah, there was a strange occurrence where people were shooting themselves in the head and randomly in public areas while playing this game of chance. Or Sergey made up the entire thing. So, why is it even called Russian roulette? The English and Italians called syphilis the French disease. The French call syphilis the Neapolitan or Italian disease. The Turks call syphilis the Christian disease. Obviously, naming a disease after a place was meant as a way to insult other groups of people. But I'm bringing this up because the name of something doesn't necessarily mean where it originated. Just like how Russian roulette doesn't mean it's originally Russian. And so, given the dubious history of Russian roulette, how did this game of chance become such a household name? While the term Russian roulette was first mentioned by Sergey, it would be movies and video games that really made this popular, specifically in the movie Deer Hunter. We see De Niro and Walken being held captive by the Viet Cong. By the way, there's zero evidence that the Viet Cong made prisoners play Russian roulette. This is just for the sake of drama. Anyways, we eventually see them play a tense scene of Russian roulette with 3 rounds, and it is this scene that really made Russian roulette mainstream, or at least in the West. This would directly or indirectly inspire other media to also have Russian roulette, including Call of Duty Black Ops, where they play Russian roulette. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be a direct homage to Deer Hunter, alongside other games and depictions. And this makes a lot of sense, as Russian roulette on movies and shows naturally have a lot of suspense and tension, and you can make a great scene out of it. But regarding the game itself being played as it was quote unquote meant to, well, it can be done. Don't do it, by the way. The historical records of this game being played are a little more shaky. There are indeed records of people playing Russian roulette and accidentally shooting themselves or their friend, such as in Commonwealth versus Malone, in which 17-year-old James Malone shot 13-year-old William Long when playing Russian roulette, or in this instance, as the gun was pointed at the other person, Russian poker. There was even an instance of a Dallas policeman, Darrell Lee Kane, shooting a 12-year-old child by the name of Santos Rodriguez during a game of Russian roulette while interrogating him about a robbery, although Kane would claim that he thought he emptied the revolver completely and didn't know there was a live round still in it. And so regarding how common this game was and specific instances in which people were forced to play this game, like what we see in Deer Hunter, we don't have actual good documentation of this other than hearsay. There have been many unsubstantiated claims and rumors of people being forced to play Russian roulette, accidents in which Russian roulette was played with blanks that resulted in serious injuries, and inconclusive deaths in which people shot themselves with a revolver loaded with 1 shot, but that doesn't mean they were playing Russian roulette. It can mean that they shot themselves with a revolver only loaded with 1 shot. But the main reason why I said that playing Russian roulette is historically shaky is that, as I've hopefully shown in the video, you can easily cheat the game, which kind of takes out the whole suspense of the game. And sure, a person who doesn't know anything about revolvers can still end up with brains on the wall, but at least for the origins of the so-called Russian roulette, I can almost certainly say that it was not a real thing. And finally, if I wake up one day and turn on the news to see that someone accidentally blew their brains out while trying to recreate what they saw in this video, I'm going to lose my mind, and they're quite literally going to lose theirs. So again, please do not play Russian roulette or put yourselves at harm's way in any way, shape, or form. Check out my Twitch where I'll be streaming soon, and I appreciate you for watching and making it to the end. Like and sub for more, and have a wonderful day.